Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman.
Well, that was rousing. Thank you very much indeed. I know it's pantomime season. Perhaps we'll get going on this. Yes, yeah. Do I need to look behind me? That's the question, isn't it? All right. Well, okay. Good evening. It's now fractionally past 7 o'clock on Wednesday, the 7th of December, 2022, and this is today's meeting of the Development Management Committee of East Herts District Council. Let me just get the agenda so we're doing it properly. So just before we get to the agenda, probably just let everybody know, we, as usual, but members of the public are unaware of this probably, we're webcast, so we go out to the world at large. So at some point, you either will or might be on the camera, so just be prepared for that. Okay. Right, very good. So item 1 is apologies. We have 3 apologies coming in from Councillor Newton, Councillor Fernando and Councillor Beckett. 1 or 2 of those came in very late in the day, so we've only been able to organise 1 substitute, and that is Councillor Suzanne Rutland Barsby, for which many thanks, Suzanne. Thank you very much. That's much appreciated. Item 2 is Chairman's announcements. I'm looking in all directions here to see if there's anything I've forgotten, but as far as I'm aware, there are no announcements, so I think we're okay on that. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member feel they've got a Tim?
Yeah, it's not a declaration of pecuniary interest, but I want to be transparent about this. On the 9th of May, I was a member of the licensing subcommittee, which granted license for the sale of alcohol on the proposed premises where Lidl have a planning application tonight.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'm not sure if you're moving your hand up and down, Ruth, or just wiggling your pen. Yes, thank you very much. Okie dokie. We've got the minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 2nd of November. That they're at pages 6 to 15 of the pack. Any comments on the minutes? In which case, I think for form I need a proposer. Thank you, Ruth. That's your hand wiggling again, and a seconder. Suzanne, thank you very much indeed. All those in favour? Peter's counting, and I think you weren't here, Carolyn. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Super. Okay. So we're now on to the main business of the evening, which is planning applications for consideration by the committee. Item 5A commences at page 20 of the pack, runs through to page 92 of the pack. And this relates to application 321 1756 FUL in respect of demolition of all existing buildings, erection of a Class E retail food store with associated car parking, reconfigured site access, servicing, landscaping, swale and installation of plant equipment at Gates of Stortford, 295 to 297 Stansted Road, Bishop Stortford, Hertfordshire. And if I could ask officers to present this item now, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, and good evening to members of the committee and members of the public. I'm Richard Freeman. I'm the Strategic Applications Team Leader in Development Management. And the application before you, if we could have the next slide, please, is for the demolition of the existing buildings on the site and the erection of a retail food store with associated works, including car parking, reconfiguration of the site access, servicing, landscaping, swales, etc., and the installation of plant equipment. The application has been made by Lidl, who are the intended operators of the site. If we could move on, please. The site's boundary is outlined in red, as you can see from this aerial photograph from Google Maps. It's currently occupied by Gates of Stortford, and their extant planning permission is as a car showroom and as vehicle repairs. That is a sui generis use. That is, it doesn't fall within any one use class, but it is what we call an employment generating sui generis use. In other words, significant economic activity and employment derives from the site, and the site falls within a designated employment area in the local plan. And as you can see from this photograph, and I'm sure members will generally be aware, as you move north from the site along Stansted Road. This is the area which you can see on the maps there is the rest of the employment area. There's a mix of uses within the site as within that area, as you can see, there's various other MOT and car replacement places. There's bulky goods stores such as builders merchants and Homebase and people like that. And a couple which provide elements of retailing, services and employment. As you get up to the roundabout with the A120, the ring road, you can see that there is some residential as well at the northern end of Stansted Road. And then immediately to the south of the site as well, you can see that there are domestic properties, residential homes facing on Stansted Road and sets the rear. So this falls immediately at the south of the employment area. Finally, you've got the Bishop Stortford North development in the top left-hand side of the aerial photograph, which members will be familiar with, is a multi-use scheme, residential led, and includes a new centre. And so we're located off Stansted Road to the north of Bishop Stortford Centre. Thank you. This is the existing site plan. So you can see the two large rectangles are the existing buildings on the site, and those are where the car repairs and car showroom happens. A lot of the rest of the site is given over to hard standing and parking, and you can make out where the access off Stansted Road is. You access off Stansted Road, it's two-way, one lane in, one lane out, and then internal circulation. There's existing parking laid out within the site, but also the area which is immediately adjacent to the southern site boundary at the front of the site, in other words, next to the residential properties, is also used for parking as well. Thank you. And this is the proposed site layout. I'll go into it in a bit more detail on a couple of different slides, but effectively the proposed store is located towards the rear, next to the railway line, with parking towards the front and towards the south in that area, which you can see there. The access points from the highway is in broadly the same location. I've got a couple of other slides where we can talk about that in more detail. You can see that there's pedestrian circulation provided in the kind of grey-brown colour. So there's a pedestrian route into the site and up to the store. The entrance to the store is on the corner at the front. So if you look at the front elevation facing on the Stansted Road, it's at the very bottom corner of that. And then you have disabled parking spaces which run along the southern elevation. And then at the rear in a pink colour, you have the loading and unloading area. That area is slightly subterranean. The ground level drops so that vehicles can be unloaded partially below ground, so that it's easy to get items in and out of the store, but that does also mean that noise is less likely to permeate. The green indicates general landscaping, and as I say, there's another image which I'll come on to, but I do just want to draw members' attention to the brook which runs along the north side of the site. You can just see Birchanger Brook there. So this is a close-up of the internal floor area of the food store, effectively. So as I say, you come in the corner at the bottom right, and then you've got the sales area is the majority of the food store. Checkout line on the right-hand side, and then you come back out, and then kind of back of house areas, if I can put it that way, run along the southern elevation, and that service area is at the western end on the left-hand side of that image. Trolley stores and things like that are located near to the access. You can just see on here that there's some cycle hoops near to on the eastern elevation at the northern side, and that is proposing 12 cycle spaces. You'll see by condition that we're requiring, if permission is granted, that is increased to 19 to be policy compliant. And these are the elevations of the food store. So at the top is the front elevation, the one which would front the road, and so kind of curtain wall glazing so that people can see into the store and can see the activity and what's going on. And the entrance is on the left-hand end of that elevation. And then the long elevation is the southern elevation, and the third one down is the rear elevation. And the bottom one is the northern elevation. As you can imagine, The side elevations are those which have less glazing to them, because in the second one down, the southern one, that's where the back of house area is, or the storage of goods, etc. for sales. And on the northern one, that's up against the site boundary and the rest of the employments area. Thank you. This is the proposed landscaping layout plan. So I just want to spend a bit more time talking about what's where beyond the building. So at the front of the site, there are 2 electric vehicle charging points proposed, which you can see. Well, I might just indicate them now. You will see that by condition, we're recommending that is increased to 6 and then going up to 13 spaces to secure greater use of electric vehicle charging as more people start to use it. Hopefully this shows you the pedestrian layout a bit better. So effectively, when you come into the site, if you're coming from the south, you turn in the left, and then you can walk down a pedestrian footpath, cross over on a protected crossing point, and then get directly to the access, to the entrance to the store, and you can circulate around as well. The disabled parking space, I think you can see just at the southern elevation of the store in a convenient location, and family parking spaces are down at the southern end of the site near to the building which says depot beyond the site boundary. At the rear of the site, as I said, is the loading and unloading area, tucked away, and then to the north, beyond the northern elevation, there is a sustainable drainage feature, a swale, to manage water runoff before it goes into the brook. This site plan shows that there is an increase in soft landscaping over the existing, which is generally hard standing. You'll see in the report that the biodiversity net gain on this scheme is quite high. It's above 1,000%, and that is more because of what's on site, if I'm quite honest. But still, that is a benefit of the scheme. It will lead to increased soft landscaping, increased biodiversity, and increased water management before there's in terms of water quality and rates before it discharges into the brook. One of the questions raised in the addendum reports, which hopefully members have seen, we've had an additional 30 representations, was a request for additional tree planting. Officers are satisfied that there is sufficient tree planting in the proposal, and it does, as I say, result in over 1,000% increase in biodiversity net gain. The full details of the landscaping, as with other matters, would be secured by condition. I wanted to spend a bit of time now on the access and the highways measures, if I may, because I know from, well, members have seen from the report that there's been a lot of local representation, a significant number of objection and support for the proposal. And one of the things which comes through clearly is concerns about the impact on the highway network. And part of that as well is the access. And our colleague from County Highways is here if there are technical questions relating to the impacts on the highway network. But specifically regarding the access, on the right-hand side, you have the existing site layout, and on the left-hand side, you have the proposed. These drawings are not exactly to the same scale, and so you can't exactly compare them with each other, but they obviously are scale drawings. The access is located in broadly the same location. There are concerns that have been raised about the impact of the access on the property, the residential property immediately to the south. Officers are satisfied that it's in the right place and that it does accord with our current standards, that it is wide enough for vehicles to be able to enter and leave. It is actually a very similar distance. It does get wider than the existing, so that it can accommodate traffic flows into and out of the development. And one of the benefits of the scheme is that it will secure a package of sustainable transport improvements. And so this is set out in the highways and transportation sections of the report. This is a highways diagram which shows, if you can make it out in red, the tactile paving for a new pedestrian crossing across Stansted Road. And so that would be brought forward as part of the proposal. and the existing northbound bus stop would be improved to include real-time bus information systems and better shelters, and a new southbound access bus stop would also be installed, as you can see, located to the south of the store. That's one part of the sustainable travel measures. Another part is that, having undertaken a pedestrian audit of the local highway network, there would be significant improvements in terms of tactile paving, crossing points across the side roads on Stansted Road, heading north and south of the site as well. So that's set out in the report. Yeah, and then that's back to the site plan. So hopefully that talks you through the proposal and what it consists of. If I may, Chair, I just want to spend a bit of time talking about a couple of the key material considerations which need to be assessed. Firstly, can I just again draw members' attention though to the addendum, the summary of additional representations. We received an additional 31, of which 20 are in support of the proposal, 10 are objecting and 2 are neutral. Only the additional issues raised are set out in there, and a lot of those relate to highways, and hopefully I've covered some of that, but I'm sure we can come back to it. One of the other issues as well clearly is about the use in an employment area. Policy ED1 of the district plan sets out that in employment areas, only uses which fall within the old use classes B1, B2, B8 or sui generis employment generating uses should be located there. In other words, manufacturing, light industrial, storage and distribution, thank you. Yeah, and research and development and things like that. And this proposal is a departure from that policy, because it sets out that before you approve another use, consideration needs to be given to whether or not one of those uses could be accommodated on the site, if necessary through altering the existing buildings on the site, or through a marketing assessment to show that the site's been marketed and none of those uses can be accommodated. Now, the site is operated by Gates of Stortford. There is an existing employment generating use on the site. And so clearly it is a site which is appropriate for employment generating uses. And so it is contrary to policy ED1 and the associated neighbourhood plan policy. And that's something which needs to weigh carefully in your consideration. The report sets out how much weight should be given to it. As the committee knows, applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan unless there are other material considerations to indicate otherwise. And in this instance, officers are recommending that application, that permission is granted because there are other material considerations which we feel outweigh the policy. That includes the job creation, which is going to happen as a result of the proposal. That includes those investments in the local transport infrastructure and sustainable travel, which we just set out. The investment itself in the store and the associated works. And that there are some other benefits of the proposal in terms of encouraging choice and access to a range of retailing suppliers, if I can put it that way, for the local community. Additionally, as you would have seen from the slides earlier, if you look at the existing character of the area and some of the other uses which are in that employment area, officers consider that this is very similar in terms of impacts to some of the other things which are happening there. Hopefully you'll see in the reports that we are recommending that there are controls on the proposal to ensure that local residents are employed both in the construction and in the operation of the store, and more leaning towards the latter. And so there'll be a direct benefit to the local economy through those conditions and Section 106 agreements to make sure that happens. And so effectively, those and the other material considerations set out in the report are what we feel outweighs the policy designation to secure it just for employment generating uses. The next issue which I wanted to turn to, if I could, Chair, is retail policy. So again, set out fully in the papers, but both the district plan and national and neighbourhood plan Policies and guidance are that there is a town centre first approach, so that retail developments should be located in the town centre, and you should only locate them in edge of centre or out of centre sites if you've carried out a sequential test, which shows that there are none of those more preferential sites available. And one of the key issues in that is about making sure that the sequential test has been done appropriately and fairly, and that there's flexibility which is inherent in the sequential test, so that one is not just testing exactly what the applicant's looking for, but you're looking at whether or not other sequentially preferable sites can make a contribution towards meeting that need, and in order to direct retail developments towards town centres. The sequential test has been undertaken, it's set out in the report, it's looked at a number of alternative locations in centres, and we are satisfied, officers are satisfied, that there are no sequentially preferable available alternative sites, even including that flexibility. And so therefore, this is an edge of centre site, and so it's appropriate in our eyes for the principle of a retail use to go into this site. Second part of retailing policy is about impact on the viability and vitality of local and district centres. So it's the town centre of Bishop Stortford and the local centres. And a retail impact assessment has been undertaken, which effectively looks at, in very brief summary, where people are shopping at the moment, and as a result of this proposal, where people might shop, and so whether or not it would have an impact on the viability and vitality of those centres. This isn't about protecting the market share of one individual store, it's about making sure that those centres retain that viability and vitality, which is important for a mixed and balanced community and a thriving economic proposition. A fair amount of the addendum deals with relatively technical matters about the level of detail of the retail impact assessment. And you'll see that the local planning authority commissioned a review of the applicant's retail impact assessment. And through that process, we queried some of the figures which were being used in that assessment. And we received a response from the applicant, which again we had reviewed, and overall we accept the findings of the retail impact assessment. That process did look at a sensitivity test, so that if the figures which were suggested by our independence expert were used as some of the inputs into that assessment, how much would things change in terms of that assessment? And the changes were relatively low, and you'll see there's a table in the addendum report which sets that out in some more detail. The test in terms of the acceptability of retail impact is set out in the main reports, and then we'll just turn to it. Sorry, I'm just struggling to find the right paragraph. Yeah, so the NPPF sets out that the impact on other centres would have to be significantly adverse for the proposal to be unacceptable in that regard. And the levels of impacts which should occur through trade diversion would be significantly below those levels as set out in the addendum report. And so we're satisfied with those impacts. The other part of that as well is about making sure that proposals don't stymie planned investments or growth, either existing committed or planned investment in centres. In other words, you don't create something which means people don't want to invest in their existing stores. And we've considered those which we are aware of and those which are likely to happen in the local area, and we're satisfied that that won't happen as well. So effectively, Chair, those two main policy issues around land use of the loss of the existing employment generating use and the principle of a retail proposal on this site, we recommend are acceptable. It is a departure from the development plan with regards to the loss of that existing use, but for those material considerations which we've set out, we consider that outweighs the harm caused. Moving on briefly, if I may, to some other matters. Clearly, impact on residential amenity is a key consideration, and there are residential properties immediately to the south of the sites. That's why I spent a bit of time talking about the access and showed you those landscaping drawings. Effectively, in officer's opinion, we do consider that the relationship with the boundary of the residential property immediately to the south would be improved through soft landscaping, and there being pedestrian infrastructure immediately adjacent to that access, as opposed to parking and vehicle movements associated with that. You'll see from the report that we are proposing an hours of use condition for when the store can operate for. And if I may, Chair, make a verbal update for the hours of use on a Sunday. We would like to recommend that the condition is hours of use between 10 and 4 p.m. as opposed to 10 and 6 p.m. as the report currently sets out, to make sure that residential amenity is impacted less from noise generation associated with the reports on a Sunday. The deliveries from the store are also controlled to make sure that they happen within the same hours, to make sure that delivery vehicles don't cause that noise disturbance as well. Similarly, conditions are proposed around floodlighting and other matters like that. Chair, the recommendation is for approval subject to conditions in the Section 106 agreement.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Okay, so let's move on to public speakers. We have one public speaker against and one public speaker for. And so we will start with the public speaker against, who is Cheryl Sovery. I'm sure it's been explained, Cheryl, but the rules of engagement are that you get 3 minutes. If you're still speaking at 3 minutes, we will cut you off. Don't do anything just yet, because I feel the need to tell you that your 3 minutes will start when you hit the button. So don't hit the button until you're ready to go, and then you've got 3 minutes.
My name is Mrs. Sovery, and I live with my family at the residential property directly neighbouring the planning application site of 295297. We understand from editorial reports that you have been requested to approve this application by East Herts Council planning officers. With this being the case, we plead you approve this application with consideration to the following 3 points. 1, relocating the entrance and main road leading onto the site to the other side of this site. This will help mitigate the noise, pollution and safety implications already detailed in our objection letters due to the close proximity as it stands. This committee accepted the close proximity as an issue in regard to planning applications 3110987 and 3220987 and instructed it to be moved away from our property. Gates did not initiate this approved application. Point 2, request that they reduce the first fence panel dividing our properties from 6 meters to 3 meters. The landscaping kept low, as well as keeping the first fence panels in their current positioning, as the plans submitted show this is to be extended further forward. In the last approved application for this site, this committee requested that the front boundary fence panel dividing our properties be reduced in height. This was done. As this application will bring a lot more traffic to Stanstead Road and the site, we and the local residents ask that a roundabout be considered to service Lidl's and its neighbouring industrial area of Stork Valley Industrial Estate. As local taxpayers, we do not want our taxes to be spent by highways at a later date, having to rectify traffic congestion caused by this application that was not considered at this meeting. If this application causes traffic issues, then Lidl's need to contribute to resolving it. We ask the planning committee consider our requests. Having a young, vulnerable, disabled adult living at the property, we have to consider her well-being and safety on top of ours. What you decide tonight could be life-changing for the whole family. We do not want to have to put our daughter into a residential care home. Thank you.
We now have a speaker for the application. This is Laura Beach. Or exactly the same rules apply to you. So you get 3 minutes. They start when you hit the button, so don't hit it until you're ready, but we will cut you off at 3 minutes if you're still speaking. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Laura Beach and I'm an Associate Director at Walsingham Planning. I'm here to speak to you about Lidl's proposal for a new neighbourhood food store in Bishop Stortford. The scheme represents a multi-million-pound investment which will secure the redevelopment and regeneration of the existing Gates of Stortford site, which is in the process of being vacated. The proposal will make efficient use of existing previously developed land in a sustainable location, close to both existing residential communities and the area of housing growth towards the north of the town. Whilst it is recognised that the site is designated employment land, it is important to note that the existing use of the site as a car showroom is not a traditional employment use, and that the Lidl scheme will provide an alternative comparable commercial use. The scheme will generate a wide range of new jobs and training opportunities and will have no impact on the wider employment area. We are aware that many of the objections from the public have focused on traffic generation and highways matters. I would just like to make clear that we have worked closely with your Highways Authority during the course of this application and that they accept the proposals. It has been shown that the scheme will not have any adverse consequences on the local road network. More importantly, the objective here is to promote active travel, to ensure that there is not an over-reliance on the use of the private car. As such, a strong package of enhancements is proposed, which will improve the local street environment through upgrading local bus stops and footpath links to ensure easy access to the store by a variety of modes of travel. We understand the concerns of the site's immediate neighbours, but it should be reiterated that the site will use an existing road access and that this will actually be improved and widened from 6 metres to 9 metres. New boundary treatment is planned in the form of hedgerows and fencing, and the existing car parking will be moved away from the boundary to provide a better relationship between the site and neighbouring properties. Full details of the proposed landscaping are to be subject to planning condition, and so can be further tweaked should permission be granted. Many Lidl food stores lie within residential areas, and Lidl understands the importance of being a good neighbour. Finally, it is relevant that the scheme will have provide a range of planning benefits. It will widen local consumer choice, delivering a new food store in a sustainable location and the first Lidl store in East Herts. It will enhance the environment of the site and will deliver a biodiversity net gain of over 10%. It will create up to 40 new jobs, and these will be available to local residents. The proposal will be of high quality design and will include sustainability features such as solar panels and electric charging facilities. And the application has received strong support from the community. Almost 600 residents responded to Lidl's consultation exercise to express their support for the scheme. In conclusion, the proposal will deliver a range of environmental, social and economic benefits and represents a sustainable form of development. There are no outstanding planning reasons why the application should not be approved. I was at the end. Yeah.
Still 3 minutes. It's the way it goes. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we now got local member, Meoni Goldspring. Yeah. Okay. So just for your benefit, particularly Meoni, but for everybody's benefit, apparently the standard time you get is 5 minutes, but it is extendable in my discretion. So you need to be very nice to me, possibly. But let's see how it goes. 5 minutes is quite a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for permitting me to speak as one of the ward members. This is a very large application for a very large superstore, and it is hugely controversial. I do appreciate all the various comments and opinions which have been submitted. There are two matters which concern me particularly. One is the effect on the immediate neighbours in a residential dwelling. The other is the effect which the extra traffic and the congestion which have on an already busy road. This is one of the 4 busiest main roads in Bishop Stortford. I will speak first about the effect on the immediate neighbours. They live at number 289 Stansted Road, immediately to the southern boundary of the site. The proposed access for Lidl is very, very close to the access drive for this dwelling. And I wonder if this nearness is in compliance with the highway's official standards. I believe that an earlier application in 2011 had to move the access further away so that the highway standard for a new build could be met, and I believe that this standard is 10 meters between access drives. It is already difficult for the residents to come out from their drive, and an increase in the volume of traffic will make it even more difficult for them. The installation of traffic lights would regulate the flow of the traffic and would give them a chance to get out. I do not believe that a puffin crossing would be sufficient. I'm also worried about the boundary treatment between this dwelling house, number 289, and the site. This is mentioned in condition number 3 of our papers, and I would like to have an assurance that the house owners will be fully involved with the details of the landscape of the hedge buffer in order to protect their privacy and also the daylight to their important rooms. I'll turn now to the problems with all the extra traffic. I can see the real benefits from having a big new supermarket at the northern end of the town. This would serve existing residents as well as new ones who are coming to live in St. Michael's Hurst, this new development. It would save these people from having to drive all the way into town through the extremely busy Hockerell crossroads. Reducing the levels of traffic at Hockerell Junction would be of a real benefit to the town. However, traffic on the Stansted Road would surely increase, and if the turning into the site is not properly managed, there will inevitably be queues and tailbacks and congestion on the main road. Such congestion is seen every day at the entrance to Aldi on the London Road, a very similar store, also facing onto a busy main road. And there is terrible congestion, terrible tailbacks and hold-ups all the time. I think that congestion and tailbacks on a busy main road brings greater dangers to pedestrians and cyclists. And again, I'm not convinced that a puffin crossing would be sufficient to control the volume of traffic which will be generated. I think that the installation of traffic lights would be a much better option. In conclusion, please will members consider 1. The access to the site being much too close to a residential dwelling. 2. The boundary treatment between this dwelling and the site. And 3. The control and management of all the extra traffic. Would it not be better and safer to have traffic lights with a pedestrian phase rather than a puffin crossing? Thank you very much. Thank you, Gemma. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Okay, so obviously we'll open up the floor in a few minutes, but we've heard some specific comments there from Mrs. Sovery and also some specific comments from Councillor Goldspink. I wonder whether officers might want to comment now. I think everybody in the room probably has spotted this, but we have Matt Armstrong here from Highways at the County Council. Matt, I'm sure there'll be questions for you, so you may feel that you want to comment now as well, because you've, like everybody else, heard what these speakers have had to say. Over to you, and take it from here, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to those public speakers for these comments. And officers have considered the impact on residential immunity very, very closely, and including clearly the nearest property. Maybe I could start off with there, if that's okay, and talking about that impact. I mean, the first thing which I'd say is members need to be aware of the existing situation. This is a site on which there is currently an operator which has permission for vehicle repairs and as a car showroom, and to use that use that site in accordance with their planning permissions. So it's not as if the existing site would not have an impact on that neighbouring property, and so I think members need to bear that in mind. Secondly, I would also say that it isn't the right approach to this is not necessarily a comparison between this scheme and a scheme in 2011, a scheme which was submitted and considered and ultimately approved in 2011 was to a different district plan, to a different local transport plan, and clearly the site situation has changed since then. And so really it needs to be assessed against current plans, policy, guidance. And specifically relating to the highways points, the local highway authority have indicated that they don't have any objection to it. And in moments, or they don't wish to restrict the grants planning permission, I'll hand over to my colleague. But I do just want to stress a couple of points. The proposal would introduce that soft landscaping along the boundary with the neighbouring property. And I absolutely agree with the comments made around the first fence panel and the soft landscaping. One of the conditions is around detailed design of the landscaping, as Councillor Goldspink said, and that would pick up on those issues. We would ensure, so there's both a landscaping condition and there's a detailed highways design condition as well, to make sure that those visibility displays are provided and that coordinates with the boundary treatment and the soft landscaping. And the soft landscape would need a management and maintenance plan to make sure those visibility displays are retained. Regarding noise, you heard us talk earlier about hours of use, and hours of delivery as well. The store itself is located further away or at the back of the site, if I can put it that way, from residential properties, in part deliberately, so as to not have an impact on residential amenity. The loading as well is tucked away at the furthest point. Vehicles would manoeuvre in and out of that loading bay in the kind of dark hatched area, which you can see, which I'll just point to, if I may. And so that is that again is away from residential properties as well. There are conditions around flood lighting as well to make sure that the impact on lighting is managed as well. And and so those elements of impact on residential amenity are considered too. Finally, around air quality, that obviously is a function around traffic as well, but the proposal does include electric vehicle charging points. It does include promotion of sustainable travel measures, and so that will have a resultant impact on air quality as well. And I might, if I may, hand over to Matt to maybe answer some of the more detailed questions.
Yes, good evening, members. Chair, would it be helpful if I gave a 1-minute overview of the highways history of this application, and then I can address some of the specific points. So yeah, we were first consulted, I think it was July last year, on this planning application. It was a clear recommendation of refusal on our part. So I don't know if members have seen our original response, which was a very firm recommendation of refusal on the basis that the application as first submitted wasn't putting the needs of pedestrians, cyclists and public transport users first, which, as we know, is current national and local policy. And so, yeah, I mean, if you looked at the original site layout, for example, it's quite different to how it looks now. There were no highway works proposed. It's been a challenging application at times, but the applicant has worked positively with us to address the issues. And now overall, our view is it's a good application in terms of sustainable, active and accessible travel. So yeah, they've already been described, the signalised pedestrian crossing, a puffing crossing, new southbound bus stop with raised castle curbing, shelter, real-time information display, an upgraded northbound bus stop. Currently, that's just a simple flagpole. So that will have a shelter, raised castle curbing, real-time information display as well. Tactile paving, pedestrian drop curbs and tactile paving at all side roads along Stansted Road down to Parsonage Lane at the south and northwards slightly as well. As I say, the internal layouts vastly improved from when first submitted, with a 3-metre wide footpath through the site. We heard about some cycle levels being conditioned, and a travel plan with some quite challenging modal shift targets over the years. So that's sorry, that's probably a bit more than 1 minute, but that's kind of an overview of the highway evolution of this planning application. Perhaps if I just touch on briefly the two main concerns, I think. The first one, the access of the adjacent residential dwelling. So, yeah, as Richard said, it's an existing access to a commercial site. It's an existing crossover. There don't seem to have been any obvious problems as a result of the existing setup. There's certainly no recorded accident history around that crossover, other crossovers along that row of houses and the access itself. A crossover typically for a single dwelling, very low numbers of vehicles going in and out, would be typically 4 or 5 a day. The scheme's been safety audited, so our safety team have looked at it, not raised any concerns. And yeah, the vehicle traffic will increase as a result of this development. I don't think anybody's doubting that. But pragmatically looking at the existing situation, we are of the view that there's not a safety concern here or fundamental severe issue, which members will be aware of is the test for determining whether a development like this can be refused or not. Congestion was mentioned, I think, yeah, 2 or 3 times. We talk about this quite a lot in applications in more recent years. We're not a capacity-based highway authority anymore. So if people want to choose to drive, they can. It's not about limiting people's choice, but it's accepting that there's a user hierarchy, both in national policy and our local policy. The needs of pedestrians, cyclists, and public transport users come ahead of the needs of the private motor car, obviously not in a safety context, but we're talking about convenience. So yes, Stansted Road, that there may be increased traffic as a result of this, but we're not a capacity-based authority anymore. The focus must be on sustainable, accessible, active travel users. And our view is this development now does that. I'm sure, yeah, there'll be questions around that to pad that out, but hopefully that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, Richard. Also, there will be questions, I'm sure. I can see some hands moving now. So we've got Councillor Ruffles, Councillor Page, Councillor Andrews, in that order, please.
I'm very grateful to Mr. Armstrong for the hierarchy being described and the pedestrian being at the top of it. I haven't quite understood the fortunes of the pedestrian on site, and Mr. Armstrong mentioned the 3-metre pathway. I wonder if someone could trace for me in a moment the journey into the site for a pedestrian. And although the many reassurances in what Mr. Armstrong said about the access and how it's being tested by experts, but I do worry about, on a busy and fast moving road very often, what the fortune of the pedestrian is who is not actually going into the development but crossing the entrance. So those points of conflict for the pedestrian on site with vehicles and crossing on the way in.
Thank you. I'll point at the screen in a moment. But if I, yeah, maybe I'll do that first and then describe it. Could you just? Can you all hear me if I don't use the microphone? Yeah. So Stansted Road is obviously here, and that's the pedestrian route. You walk down a pedestrian route, you've got the landscape on one side, you've got parking on the other, and then you've got to cross over the internal circulation road, and then the markings on the road to crossing, and you walk across, and then that's the entrance. If you have parts in the site, then you can make the way around. A few other things to point out, if you are continuing north or south, then there is improved crossing point tactile paving at the mouth of the junction. That, and as set out, there will be crossing points
Probably not a lot to add. I mean, in a way, I wish I could show you the original applicant's plan because it wasn't good. But yeah, this is better. And so that Richard's pointed out that the 3-meter route, the direct route from Stansted Road to the front of the store. Currently, the access is it's quite wide curve radii. There's pedestrian drop curves, but there's no tactile paving. It's a defined access, but the change in design is vastly improved on the highway plan that's presented before us with the tactile paving. The crossing distance of the new access, so it will be a slightly wider access. I think that's been observed already, but it will be 9 meters from. So do you mind just switching back to the previous plan? Sorry. Or the high, have you got the highways plan? Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. So if you take the center point of the footway, so imagine if you're walking along the footway in the very middle part of the footway, and you get to the access, you're not going into the proposed development, you're crossing over it, as you said will happen. The measurement point across the bell mouth from the center of the footway to the center of the opposite footway is 9 meters. And the technical standard that our safety team would always say where a red flag kind of alerts them as to an excessively wide crossover is 11 meters. That doesn't always mean across an access of bell mouth greater than 11 meters is unacceptable. Obviously, we have to look at each particular case on its own merits. But this comes within the kind of acceptable criteria for that. So I don't know whether that helps.
It does help, Chairman. And I can see the problems, as I'm sure we all can, always round. The big worry for me is the vehicle coming in from the south. And as a driver, you do kind of feel you have an obligation not to go too slowly on a main road like this when you intend to turn left into the site. And that does put the pedestrian at some risk, but clearly it's been examined very closely, and I take Mr. Armstrong's word that improvements have been effective. But I'll wait and see if other members want to pick up on it.
Sorry, I don't mean to jump in, but it might be worth noting. So the new signalised pedestrian crossing, bus stop, you see the keep clear, the zigzags and so on, all of those will naturally act as a traffic calming feel and feature to that to northbound traffic there. So I think it's worth bearing that in mind as well.
Thank you, Peter. Tim Page.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've got a query about traffic. It's more to do with what's north of the site rather than what's south of the site. Currently, you have a road feeding into Stansted Road to the north, St Michael's Road, which is a no right turn, but rarely observed as such. And as far as I can tell, rarely enforced. You have traffic coming down from the A120, considerable amount of traffic that turns right into the industrial estate. And you've got 3 major retailers on the left-hand side to the north, with traffic coming in from both directions. So my question on this is, have you made a study of the traffic between Lidl store and the A120 roundabout, taking in St Michael's Road junction and taking in the volumes of traffic which use both the industrial estate and the builders merchant operators.
Richard or Matt?
Yeah, I'm happy to. We're looking at obviously the impact of this development, and any development can only be expected to mitigate against its own impact. So I don't dispute or doubt that there may be issues at that road further north, Michael's Road, as you've been describing, but the test within a planning context is it reasonable to expect this development to resolve perhaps existing issues like that? Will this development exacerbate that? Obviously, and I think our view is it's not that's not a reasonable test to apply to this. Again, the focus is on sustainable, accessible, active travel, and not on facilitating the private motor car. Of course, there's a realism here where a supermarket, people will use the car, they want to do bulk shops, but equally we're in a climate emergency, we have a climate crisis, and frankly we all need to be reconsidering changing the way how we travel, and there's I won't go through it again, but the sustainable, active, accessible travel measures proposed as part of this development, tick the boxes in that respect. And I think it's remembering the test of refusing an application in a highways context, NPPF paragraphs 110 to 112. It's test of safety and severity. So the more recent NPPF has split this out. I think I've talked about this before at committee. It used to just be this term severe, and we were all left a little bit, what does that mean? And since 2018, the NPPF has made that clearer. Split it out where there's a clear safety issue, and there's not here. As I say, it's been safety audited. Or severity being what follows in paragraph 112, which is any development that does not put the needs of pedestrians, cyclists, or public transport users first. I hope that helps.
I don't know, Richard, whether you want to add anything. You may not, but just to make sure.
No, really just to reiterate that final point, the NPPF says development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there be unacceptable impacts on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. And that we've received advice from professional experts saying it would not meet that level of impact.
Tim, are you happy with that as an answer to your question?
Well, I accept what I've been told. I'm not happy with the underlying policy that we can bring anybody into the town and hold them up for hours, and that doesn't really matter anymore as long as the bus gets through. I wouldn't pretend to be a supporter of that policy, but I hear what's said, and thank you for the answer.
I could have put my question to you better. I'm sorry. David Andrews.
Thank you. Let me just find my bus timetables quickly. Okay, I've got a number. I had to start thinking about prioritising them. But the first one I had really was around this question of where the entrance is, and would it be practical and reasonable to move it? But thanks to the excellent explanations, I've now parked that. I do have a concern. Could we go back to the picture that shows the car park area in the centre? No, the actual map. Sorry, the drawing. That's the fella. Yeah, super. Quite a nice area there for people who, after shop hours, want to get up to some nefarious activity in their vehicles, or their electric scooters, or their skateboards, or whatever. From the point of view of vehicle access, I'm thinking this should be secured when the store is closed or shortly thereafter, because Otherwise, this might have all sorts of potential, which we would not wish to encourage. So I'd like to give some thought to that. It need not necessarily be a physical barrier. I mean, it might be an AMPR camera that comes on at 10 o'clock at night. So at least the store operators have an idea who've been and when and why. So some thought around that. Councillor Beckett, in his submission some months ago, was talking in terms of 6 EV chargers, and I was thinking in terms of 10, and I gather it's now 10%, 13 we're looking at. I was thinking about access for residents, but having looked at the local properties, most of them, if not all of them, seem to have off-road parking, so that may actually not necessarily be beneficial. But what does strike me as strange is that the EV charging, wherever you go in a supermarket context, always seems to be about as far away from the supermarket as you could possibly get it. Disabled people drive electric vehicles too. Disabled people, blue badge holders, are increasingly buying electric vehicles, but they will have to hike from Siberia across. So could we not have 10% of the bays that are blue badge, preferably the ones nearest the entrance, as EV charging? And likewise, why is the EV charging anyway? We want to encourage it. We want to encourage people to use EVs. Now, the challenge always there will be some people will rock up from the M11 to get a cheap charge and sit in their car for 2 hours, and they won't go in the store. But that's another issue. But why do we always put the EV charging so far away from the store entrance? Surely we should be encouraging it, and it should be that little bit further than the mother, daughter, father, son facility, the family parking. So something to think about there. And finally, who's paying for these highway works? Because I've noticed in the report that we've got section 106, 6,000 odd pounds described in fairly vague terms that don't really take me on a journey yet, which for a development of this size, frankly, seems a bit strange. But obviously there's a vast amount of money, several £100,000, I would imagine. The surveys alone must be running at £40,000 to put in place these highway works. And I'm hoping it's not the residents that are going to be paying for that. I'll stop there if I may. I'll bring the timetable out in a minute.
Thanks, David, very much. Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start us off and maybe my colleague wants to come in. And social behaviour, yeah, agree. Condition 34 requires details of a management plan when the store's not open to secure the car park. And as you say, we want to see the details of it because there's a couple of different ways which it can be done. So that matter is already addressed in the.
But I think the committee would like to know what the details are as well. We have in the past various other stores, one not terribly far from here. Have you got any idea what you might propose, or you're leaving that entirely to the?
Yeah. So our recommendation is that there's a condition which requires the details to be agreed prior to the store opening. Yeah, that's what our recommendation to the committee is. And sorry, just to expand on that a little bit, I think it's reasonable to expect that at this stage in the planning process, whilst there's clearly an operator in mind, i.e. Lidl's, I don't know what their methods are for.
Yeah, their chosen methodology.
Yeah, exactly. Who they might contract to, whether or not they want to do that down the line, and so I think it's reasonable that comes forward at a later date. Yeah, it's a good point about electric vehicle charging points. I think everyone would agree that the hierarchy in terms of the proximity to the entrance point should be blue badge disabled spaces and then family parking. But I do accept the point about electric vehicles can coexist with those two. The reason traditionally where it's done, and again maybe Matthew will want to come in on that, is that you don't necessarily want to mean that blue badge holders who aren't in electric vehicles then don't have a space because they don't want to start parking a blue badge electric vehicle space, if that makes sense. In the same from a family perspective. There are some technical requirements around access to substations and the noise which substations can have, but ultimately I think officers would agree with the point in principle, and if the committee feel it's the right approach, then a condition around detailed design and layout of the car parking to be agreed would be an appropriate way of dealing with that. Turning on to the section 106 agreement, £6,000 is not going to get those highway works done. That £6,000 is for monitoring of the travel plan for the county. Conditions, I think, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, require that those highways works are provided by a certain trigger point, and so it would be at the developer's cost effectively.
Not really anything to add to that. Yeah, the developer will be paying for the highway works, implementing them in full before store opening. The conditions require that.
That's section 17.
So they're planning conditions in the decision notice. As Richard mentioned, the £6,000 travel plan is an evaluation and support contribution. So we have a travel plan team at the county council who check, monitor, enforce developers' travel plans. Travel planning isn't a statutory function of the county council, but it's a very important function. So we don't automatically receive funding from government for the travel plan team. So the way how we help fund that team is through developer evaluation and support contributions. So it's basically funding staff at the county council to check, monitor, enforce travel plans.
I've just come in there just so we aren't talking ourselves into some confusion. I think relative to Councillor Andrews' point, the £6,000 is a little bit of a side issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Councillor Andrews is anxious to be sure that the developer and not the taxpayer will pay for all the highways works.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the answer to that question is
yes.
or no.
The developer will be paying entirely for all the highway works, implementing them. Obviously, us checking them that they're to standards. And very, very rough cost to the developer. I mean, it's difficult to say, but maybe in the region of £150,000 to £200,000.
Yeah, that's right. That's an answer. Yeah, a quick supplementary then.
This is a fabulous report, but like many of us, I suspect, find it difficult to constantly flick backwards and forwards. Hence, not picking up on some of the condition numbers. But that condition, the highway works, that will all be in place before the store is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's condition 16 and 17.
Now, I was going to say that Ian Kemp put his hand up, but that call came at an inappropriate moment. So we'll give you a little breather. So I've got Ruth Buckmaster, then I'll take you, Ian. Is there anyone to make a third? Ben Crystal. So Ruth first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was very pleased to see about the your sustainable travel plan and the fact you've got, pedestrians, cycles and public transport. But I'm a bit doubtful as to a sustainable travel plan, including bicycles to a food shop. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever done your week's shopping on a bike. I have, and it's actually quite, and also a bit dangerous trying to balance your shopping on your handlebars, especially down the Stansted Road, because it's not that safe a road. So I'm just a bit doubtful whether you can include cycling to a food shop as part of your sustainable travel plan. My second point is, actually my concern is on the deliveries. Now you've said that you want the deliveries to be conditioned to their opening hours, which are up till 10 o'clock at night. Now, looking at how close the residents are to the park at the area, not necessarily your loading and unloading bay, but they are next to the entrance where they will drive in and out. Now, in Lidl's words, they want to be a good neighbour. And I just wondered whether it would be neighbourly if you could actually condition the delivery hours to maybe at the latest 8 o'clock at night. Bearing in mind, if any of those residents have young children, lorries coming in and out at 10 o'clock at night would disturb them. Thank you.
I think we might just take, I'm going to give you a little small breather still, Ian. We'll just take Ben Crystal now, and then we'll come to you, Ian, and then officers will pick everything up in one go.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, thank you for the report, the highways information as well. is there a case at all for a highways monitoring study to be done, or a traffic study to be conditioned for a year or 2 years along that section of road to monitor the impact of the store? I don't know. I don't know if there was if it was done and there was an issue, whether it'd be possible to actually do anything about that. But just raising a question. It's good to see the sustainability aspects of the store. I think it's. Can I confirm that it's 850 square meters approximately of solar panel and an air source heat pump? They're still due to be done. Bit concerning that the panels are all north facing, so that they won't be very efficient. But great sustainability. They'll lose a bit of efficiency, but great sustainability. I noted that I think a condition for bird and bat boxes was one of each, and considering that the development and presumably the operator have a very obviously have high standards of sustainability, it would be fantastic if they embraced that a little bit further, and we could perhaps push the numbers of birds and bat boxes up, maybe 5, 6, particularly as this store's right beside the Stort and the brook, which will obviously be very good places for bats and potentially swifts. So I wondered if we could maybe just kind of lift the box number up. And that was it. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Okay, Ian, let's hope the phone doesn't ring. Where you go?
Yes, I do apologise to the committee and other attendees for my failure to put it on to Do Not Disturb at the beginning of the meeting. I have now done so. I also apologise to the chair and committee. As you may have guessed from previous experience, I do have a fair number of questions. I will try and take them into blocks, and I will try to use in this block one.
Actually, with apologies to interrupt you, and if you do have quite a lot of questions, I wonder if we might just take the two members' questions so far and then come back to you.
Well, what I was going to say was that I've got questions that are relevant
In that case, carry on.
to the ones that have already been placed. So I'll focus on those and then leave the others till later. Couple of comments. As it's been mentioned, as with all large applications, it is controversial. But on the other hand, it was interesting to see that more respondents were actually in favour than against, which is quite unusual for a planning application. I think that was an impressive thing. Believe it or not, my screen has just chosen to go blank. But while it is recovering, I think I can remember enough about what I was going to say. It's very good to have highways with us, which is much appreciated. It's great to be able to ask questions directly, and very pleased to see obviously the emphasis on sustainability. But what I'd like to emphasize is that we have to consider the complete journey, not just the environment immediately adjacent to the store. And people arrive in a variety of different ways. This actually has very good car access, and it's interesting to see that actually it will be very easily accessed from other towns and villages locally. And I think that is actually a plus point for it. It's only just off the ring road. But then there's the question of buses, there's the question of cycles, there's the question of pedestrians. For a lot of people locally, cycle and pedestrian access will be good. Councillor Buckmaster has referred to transporting shopping on cycles. I have actually been doing that more recently, and actually with a rear carrier, it works fine. And I found it's been a very useful alternative to driving down into town. So that's my little bit of greenness improvement. However, areas which will also benefit from this are what you might call Bishop Stortford North, and that's the very north bit off Marbury Avenue, which is accessed by Michael's Road, and the sort of more northwest bit, which is accessed via Newlands Road. and the shortest route to that actually by pedestrian or cycle would be Cannons Mill Lane. Both of those would actually be really rather difficult for either pedestrians or cyclists. I walked around those routes before coming here, which meant I had to change my shoes before I came here. Because Cannons Mill Lane is unmade, it's muddy, it involves a walk, foot crossing, a level crossing across the railway line, and parts of it are unlit. And Michael's Road, as some of the objections mentioned, is narrow. It has a very narrow footpath, which in places is on one side only. To reach that footpath, you therefore have to cross Michael's Road, which, as also pointed out, is a busy road, and has no pedestrian crossing on it. I think the point I'd want to make to highways in particular is that I would like to have seen more consideration of, if it's going to be truly sustainable and we want to see modal shift, we want to see the actual journeys considered and improvements being requested or thought of that would actually make those journeys helpful. I'd welcome any comments as to improvements that could be made, for example, pedestrian crossing across the entrance to Michael's Road, or out of the back of the site, a foot and cycle bridge actually over the top of the railway, which would provide a direct route over to Bishop Stortford North, going into the Grange Paddocks area. And will those sorts of things be considered in the survey that has been referred to? As for buses, bus stops outside have been referred to. Do those bus stops give direct routes, firstly to the Bishop Stortford North via Morbury Avenue, and secondly to Bishop Stortford Northwest via Newlands Road? Because if they don't, they're not much use for those developments in terms of sustainable access. And finally, the electric vehicle spaces. I actually think there is some sense in having them a fair way away from the store, because that means people aren't tempted to park in them when they don't need an electric vehicle charging, and if the other ones are full. However, it's good to see that we are going to ask for 10%, but I feel that condition 14 as it stands is a little too weak. It says that some sort of phased approach might be necessary. I would like to see condition 14 specifically requiring at the outset, whatever happens, 6 electric vehicle spaces. That's the 5% standard minimum requirement, and then to go up to 10% later possibly. But at the moment, it doesn't lay down any minimum initial requirement, and I would like to see that included.
Thank you, Ian. Well done. I think we maybe start with Richard, and then if Matt's got a comment, come in, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's got quite a range of points there. So sorry, I might come back for a second bite of the cherry if I may as well. I think the point around cyclists and their shopping has partially been answered. Thank you very much. But yeah, I would agree the way that a variety of different people use cycling as a mode of transport for various different reasons. Cargo bikes are more frequently used. People don't always do a weekly shop these days, especially if something serves a more local catchment. And it's good to see obviously that there's a proliferation of cyclists. So yeah, officers consider that it is appropriate, and it is also about encouraging that modal shift, which Mr. Armstrong spoke about earlier, and that is clearly something which we want to encourage and facilitate and ensure happens. So we do consider that that's appropriate, and again that study has been reviewed. Moving on to the deliveries points, and this revolves around impact on residential amenity. I mean, the report and the request was to change delivery hours to finish at 8 p.m. I mean, ultimately, if that's something which the committee consider is necessary, that is something which they can do. But the advice from officers is that that is not necessary. Our environmental health team have considered the proposal and are happy with those longer hours for it. That servicing area is 60 metres away from properties. The noise assessment undertaken as part of the report shows that the area generally does start to get quieter at 10 and then generally gets quieter after that. And so up until that point, it isn't so quiet that that vehicles moving around would be significantly detrimental to residential amenity. So the recommendation to committee at any rate is that is as set out in the reports. It's probably also worth mentioning that there's a condition preventing any home deliveries from the site, which does lead to additional traffic in terms of more frequent smaller vehicles. And also that, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the servicing is right in the corner. The vehicle would be tucked behind the store and slightly subterranean. Obviously, it then needs to leave and would maneuver through the site, so there would be some impact. But also on the other side of that, the existing use would have servicing vehicles potentially in the site, and I'm not aware that there are any restrictions on those at the moment, so I think that needs to be borne in mind. Yeah, solar panels, air source heat pump to be secured by conditions, so those sustainability measures, and I did check, and the sustainability report does say 20 degrees of north, which is slightly surprising, but the details of it are to be submitted for approval. Bird and bat boxes. I think we need to be aware of our policy base, and that does not set out specific targets. There is now a requirement for biodiversity net gain. Generally, one talks in the order of about 10%. This is over 1,000%. I mean, for what it's worth, I do agree that it would be good for there to be more than one bird and one bat box, but conditions do need to meet the test of reasonableness and necessity, and that is a really good biodiversity net gain, and so officers are satisfied with what's in front of us. Moving on to some of the transport related points, I'll maybe have a first stab at answering some of them and move on to my colleague. I have also checked the bus timetables, and it's the service 301 and 306 which runs at the front of the site, as I understand it, and those effectively runs north south, so they don't go into the Bishop's or North development. And so I understand the requests and notes the concerns about shopping for residents in that development. A couple of things to point out: it will have its own local centre. There is a local centre consented within that scheme, which would include some retail as well, and so there would be that local shopping opportunity. And then the other one really is the point about conditions need to meet the planning tests, which are reasonable and proportionate and necessary effectively for the development. It wouldn't meet the test for crossings over the railway line to be improved as a result of this development. And similarly, quite an extensive assessment was made of the pedestrian network, which has led to these improvements along Stansted Road. And those are the ones which have been agreed are the ones which are necessary in terms of the improvements to the pavements.
Yeah. Try and add to that. Let me just read out, a paragraph from the applicant's transport assessment, their original transport assessment. July last year, I think it was. Lidl's custom is predominantly drawn from within a 5-minute drive time. We can debate whether that's the reality or not, but that's how the applicant has presented this application to us. So our comments on that, our views at the time were, well, if that's the case, then that is ideal territory for sustainable travel users. The reality is most of us shouldn't have to be jumping in the car for a 5-minute journey time. Okay, there's obviously always going to be exceptions to that. Some of us it is a necessity, but we know in Hertfordshire 60% of car journeys that are undertaken are less than 5 miles, and it's exactly those journeys that we're targeting, trying to improve the network, some of it through developments like this, Section 106 money. We've got very ambitious schemes ourselves to try and improve the sustainable, accessible, active travel infrastructure, so that those journeys less than 5 miles, we don't need to get in the car anymore. It's about that long-term change. So some might cycle to the site, some will cycle to the site. We need to think of those. We need to accommodate those, and I think it's that long-term view where it's a wind of change, as I think I've referred to it before. A highway monitoring study was mentioned. It's a possibility, but I think we need to know what are we monitoring. It's exactly what happened at Hertford Sainsbury's. I think it was around 2007, 2008. So there was a lot of concern at the time about the impact of Sainsbury's on is it Old Cross, Port Hill, the access there, the traffic lights, and I think that went to appeal, and obviously was granted permission. And through the Section 106 agreement, there was a clause within that Sainsbury's had to monitor. So it's a little vague on the details, but had to monitor the amount of vehicle traffic going in and out of their access. So I think it was just sort of traffic loops within their access. And if it went above a certain level consistently over a set period of time, then there was a requirement for Sainsbury's to then implement highway improvements on the network. I say that was 2008-ish time, I think. And yeah, those monitoring reports were sent to the county council on a monthly basis for several years. It never went anywhere near the level that was set out. Supermarket trips, their distribution in particular, are notoriously difficult to predict. But I mean, that's one case, as saying in Hertford, where they're much lower than was thought, than was modelled at the time. So I think, a highway monitoring study, what is it we're monitoring? We're not a capacity-based authority anymore. So, are we monitoring the amount of vehicles going in and out of the access? Well, what will that tell us? What kind of scheme will that result in if it is above a certain trigger level? So we wouldn't then be looking for capacity highway schemes. So, if it was a highway monitoring study around sustainable travel users, then yes, I mean, that'd have to have quite a bit of thought. But I think it's a completely different mindset to Hertford Sainsbury's back in 2008. And there are some kind of practical challenges of securing that through Section 106 anyway. Bishop Stortford North was mentioned. So I think the focus of Bishop Stortford North highway improvements is largely along Rye Street, the B1004. There's lots of highway improvements proposed along there. My understanding is that there's a shared footpath, cycle path scheme through Grange Paddocks Meadow, which then routes out onto Cannons Mill Lane. So the eastern end of Cannons Mill Lane, I think, as you were saying, is not in the best condition, is unmade at points. So I'm not entirely sure whether that's included within this footpath, cycle path scheme, but there is a route through from Rye Street proposed to get people further across east, which would bring them out onto Cannons Mill Lane and then eventually out onto Stansted Road. Michael's Road, there's some real challenges there in the extent of highway. So, it goes over 2 bridges. I think there's a bridge over the railway, a bridge over the river, and physically there's just not much room to do much. It'd be lovely to put in 2-3 metre wide footways. And I think, with all of this, it's about a test of what's reasonable, what's in scale and proportion to the proposed development. So, this is a supermarket that's proposed. It's quite a large supermarket, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect this supermarket to solve, all of Bishop Stortford's problems. And I'm not saying that's what you were implying at all, but I think it's just having that test of reasonableness. And I think the bus stops the bus routes have already been mentioned. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, I've got just a couple of points myself, but before I offer the mic. There's any Carolyn and anybody, and Ian wants to come back as well. We'll take you in that order though. You go first, Karen.
Just a query, you say the biodiversity has increased by 1,000%. Exactly how is that worked out? You mean there was one daisy there and now there are 1,000? It isn't very clear to me. The figures on it, it's what it looks like that matters, not the percentage. And I do think there should be more trees. That's all really. Thank you.
Ian. Part 2.
Okay, yes, and thanks for the replies on that. No, I don't think I was expecting the supermarket to pay for all of this certainly on its own. But I did want to hear that Hertfordshire County Council was looking at actually doing something practical or thinking about doing practical things about sustainable transport and cycle routes. Good to hear it is at least being considered. If you're improving Rise Street up, I'm not quite sure, are you expecting people to walk across the existing level crossing across the railway, which obviously entails a significant extra risk. And you know, that Network Rail might not be too happy about that idea. As I say, a pedestrian crossing onto Michael's Road to help people actually get onto the one footpath that there is might be helpful. Okay, so the other points I wanted to make, we've talked about deliveries and experience with superstores of various sorts, especially ones recently constructed, suggests that those can be a problem. There is a condition limiting their times, which is good, but how will that be enforced? Because supermarkets do seem to tend to push the edges. Similar question on lighting. There are some requirements there about lighting and keeping it down, but I know of at least one supermarket where there is intrusive lighting, which is left on all night, even after the store has been closed, and is quite annoying to residents. And I don't see a condition down here to stop that happening. And I think something of that sort would be helpful. The other question I did want to come back to, because it has been raised specifically, is the access point and its relationship to this particular house at the south end of the site. Now there is an existing access at that point, but the bell mouth on the new one looks wider. So is the centre line of the new access road in the same place as it was? Is therefore the edge of the bell mouth closer to, I think it's 289 Stansted Road than it was? Reference was made to a 10 metres condition that applied a few years ago. Has that condition been abolished, or does it not apply for some reason in this case? And indeed, was any consideration given to simply swapping round the access point so that it's at the north side of that area and the electric vehicle charging points at the south side of the area, which seems as if it's one possibility. There was also one point that I made from my previous set of questions which wasn't answered, and I'm struggling to remember what it was. It occurred to me a minute ago. That's right, it was about whether we could change condition 14 to actually formally require 6 electric vehicle spaces minimum.
Can I suggest you, Richard, I think it'll fall to you, start with the point, read condition 14, so we don't forget it twice.
Thank you. Yeah, condition 14. So condition 14 requires that 10% obeys our electric vehicle charging points, but it does reference a timetable for that to be agreed. It is common that with these types of conditions, not all of the electric vehicle charging points are active, i.e. have the actual chargers there on day one, and that some of them are passive. They got the cabling under the ground, and that as electric vehicle take up is progresses in the future with changes to combat climate change, they can be brought into use. I would say that it would be in the operator of the store's own interest to make sure that they are meeting demand, and so that if there is that demand for to change some of those from passive to active. Our policies do not have a specific mandatory requirement for a certain level to be active and passive at day one. However, we are in the body of the report at 10:59. We are suggesting that 5%, i.e. 6 spaces of the initial provision, is the case at day one, with the following 10% at a later date. So I actually don't want to suggest to committee now a trigger point for when the other 5% are provided to be made active, but I would agree that 6, i.e. half of them, should be active on day one if that part of it is what you were guessing at. I think that it requires further detailed consideration in accordance with how the travel plan is working as well, which is also about promoting sustainable travel to make sure that that's those two are working together. So if the request is tighten up the wording to make it clear that 6 electric vehicle charging points shall be provided active when the store is open, then that would be in accordance with our thinking, and we can make that change. Coming to say, dotting around ever so slightly, biodiversity net gain, it is to a large extent a factor of what's there at the moment, but actually for a site of this nature, that is I would say a relatively significant amount of soft landscaping. It is about biodiversity as a benefit of itself, not just kind of amenity and what things look at. We need to make sure that we are providing a variety of soft landscaping. DEFRA, Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, does provide a matrix, and that's how we work it out. Different types of planting have different values effectively, and you calculate it and it goes from there. This does include biodiverse planting, it does include grassland and wetlands and the swale, and it will have an improvement on the Birchhanger Brook area as a result of that. Moving back to
Sorry, a little point there was trees. The word trees was specifically mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. So that is part of that measurement. So trees have a certain factor in terms of biodiversity net gain. You can see the trees on that plan, and I would say actually that is a good level of coverage. You need to make sure right tree, right place. You don't just want to put them in too densely so that they're not going to survive and they're not going to flourish. So officers consider that is acceptable and appropriate. If we can come to enforcement matters, the answer, councillor, is as with the enforcement of all other planning matters and conditions. In order for a development to be lawful, it needs to comply with its conditions. If there are breach of those conditions, our enforcement team will investigate and then we'll take action as required depending on the seriousness of it. And one of the issues with this type of condition is about demonstrating the breach, if I'm honest, and things which happen at certain times and not others. It can be relatively difficult to build up that evidence base, and I think officers are aware of that, but that is how the planning enforcement system works, if I'm honest, and those types of conditions are very normal. We do already have a condition proposed around lighting. That's condition 27, to meet a certain level. So I think that's appropriate. Might be that as part of the
Sorry, just come in. I think the question was to hours, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Rather
Yes,
than-
I looked at conditions 26 and 27, which cover lighting, but they seem to me to be too vague, and they didn't mention hours at all.
Yeah, well, I suggest, and the potential operator is in the room, that when they submit details to discharge the condition around security of the car park. Part of that might be about lighting, because you may want some levels of lighting, but not total. So seeing those two conditions together from the discharge of condition processes is what we think is right. I will ask my colleague to answer the questions around the access, but I do actually have some measurements which I will provide to the committee, which may or may not be the right thing. Would you mind just moving? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is the existing site plan on the right-hand side and the proposed site plan on the left-hand side. So measured existing and proposed, 3 different measurements. Firstly, from the boundary fence of the neighbouring property to the south, where that boundary fence meets their front elevation, and I'll point to it in a moment, from there to the centre of both of the accesses. And that existing distance was 10.6 meters, and the proposed would be 12 meters. So in that measurement, if you can put it that way, it moves further away. The access widths, where they become, normal, if I can use that terminology, for the existing is 6.2 meters, and then 7.4 for the proposed. And where the radii hits Stansted Road, for the existing, the distance from that to where I take the neighbour's drop curb access point to be, existing is 3.8 and proposed is 3 meters. So that's the point at which it comes nearer. So maybe if I can just point to the drawing. So the first measurement was there to there, and correspondingly on proposed, and so by that measurement that's further away. The second was just across the width of those accesses, and then where that radius hits the road, there is 3.8. There is 3 meters. So it does move a bit more in this fence, but not in the other measurements.
Yeah, I think the crossover next door, it's been referred to tonight as the 10-meter rule, 10-meter condition. It's neither of those. It's a 10-meter recommendation in our crossover guidance, and our crossover guidance is exactly that. It's guidance. So like all guidance, it represents the starting point, not necessarily the end point. So it's looking at each situation, each application, each development on its own merits, in the context of its local environment. And I think it just basically comes back to what we were saying at the start. It's an existing crossover, an existing access along an existing highway that has always functioned okay. In our view, it's an acceptable, safe setup.
The 10-meter rule that you mentioned, is that to the centre line of the crossover, or is that to the edge?
Yeah, sorry to be pedantic. It's not 10-meter rule. The 10-meter recommendation.
Whatever it, yes.
Yeah. So it's been measured in different ways in our crossover guidance over the years. So we've had crossover guidance that has been revised over the years, but it's from the edge of the crossover to the not the start of the curb radii, but where the curb radius becomes straight. So it's not the center line of the main axis, it's a little bit into the axis, if that makes sense. Did that make any sense, or would you like me to?
I think that makes sense. Yes.
So from the end of the crossover, slightly into the axis of the site, where it straightens up internally.
Yeah. Okay. The message seems to be that the access road, in terms of centre line, has been moved a little further away from the house compared to the old one, but it will be carrying more traffic. But that the bottom end of the bend will be a fraction nearer.
Okay, I'm just a little bit mindful of time. It's right that we give these things due consideration. I've got Karen or Richard. I've got Tony Stowe that wants to just ask. Perhaps let Tony ask his question.
I want to go back to one of the questions that Councillor Andrews mentioned, was about the security of the site of an evening. This is a great concern throughout the whole district of people that like to do drugs and drink, and they park their cars up. Now, there's two reasons I was wondering if we can make a condition whereby the barrier was a gate, which made it more difficult. And also, of course, some low lighting would need to be on, particularly in those dark corners where that is liable where the young people will go and do their business.
Okay, let's take that. And then I've got just a wrap up couple of points which won't trouble us too much.
Yeah. So in reverse order around safety and security, I'd say officers agree, and so that's why we feel that yeah, we would like to see the measures around security and say safety of the car park to include information around lighting to make sure that that's the case. We don't feel that a barrier gate or whatever is what we would desire to see. They can cause their own maintenance issues around proximity to the highway, and if they break it, can lead to tailbacks and things like that as well. And generally, gated developments do have their downsides in terms of when people are inside them, you aren't so aware of what's going on, and it can lead to it not feeling part of the public realm. And I just wanted to come back very briefly on the highways points as well, just to two other points. The committee needs to make a decision on what is in front of it, this proposal. That's where the access is. You can obviously come to your conclusions as to the acceptability or otherwise, but that's the matter in front of you, and access in that location, not one in a different location. And I said it right at the beginning, and you might have just seen a photograph on the screen earlier. At the moment, we've been talking about where the access is in relation to the neighbour's point, neighbour's property, but don't forget there's hard standing and car parking running all the way down that around that boundary at the moment, and under this scheme there would be soft landscaping and then a pedestrian walkway and then the parking.
Thank you. That just brings me neatly into just a couple of points from me. The first is that at least one of our speakers made a reference to a signalled crossing rather than a puffin crossing. I don't think any officer in response has used the word puffin, so I think it's just quite important for members, and also to show respect to the point being made that we are clear as to the difference between a puffin crossing and a light signalled crossing. And another point that was made, again, maybe I missed it, but I haven't heard a direct response, was the suggestion that the most immediate neighbour should be involved in the landscaping of the boundary with their property. And I just think, again, the question warrants a direct comment on that, please.
Again, in reverse order, if that is what committee would like, then the condition around detailed landscaping design can make reference to the submission being clear, providing information as to consultations with the neighbour in that submission, so that I can deal with that. And I will absolutely defer to my colleague with regards to puffins.
A puffin crossing is a signalised crossing. I think what was being referred to was the access being signalised to stop traffic in that sense. But a puffin crossing is an intelligent signalised pedestrian crossing, so that somebody who is perhaps a bit slower crossing it, the crossing knows that it detects pedestrian movements across, and so it will hold the red signal until somebody is fully across. Rather than the old-fashioned sort of pelican crossings, which there's just a set timing and then the flashing amber lights, and if you're still on the crossing, well, when the red man comes, well, you're kind of stranded. So it's an intelligent pedestrian signalised crossing.
Just for the benefit of the question and to make sure we're doing the question justice, with all due respect to the question, was it misconceived? Did it represent a misunderstanding of what a puffin crossing is then?
I'm not sure. I think the question was, and I don't want to presume, but I think it was saying that the access, rather than being a simple priority T junction, could be a signalised T-junction with pedestrian crossing phases over it, rather than a separate pedestrian crossing away from the access, which is to the south.
Well, okay, if that's what you took the question to be, what's your answer?
But what's the question? Sorry.
You just put it to me that you have understood the question or could understand the question in a particular way.
Right.
If you understand it that way,
Right.
what is your answer?
My answer is with the focus on sustainable travel users, pedestrians at the top of the user hierarchy, what is proposed before us, a puffing crossing, is acceptable to facilitate, to accommodate this proposed development.
Very good. Thank you
you.
very much. Okay. All right. So we've spent quite a lot of time on this. So I'm hopefully going to draw this to a conclusion. So I think the task I now have is just to make sure that we know what variants to conditions may have come up. If you've been making a note, Richard, can you just run us through that, please?
Yeah, I can. Firstly, Sunday opening hour is restricted to 1600 hours as opposed to 1800 hours. Secondly, detailed design of the landscaping, the submission of details to include details of liaison with local residents. By which I mean the neighbour immediately to the south of the site, and we'll put that in the condition. The electric vehicle charging points condition to specify that 6 would be provided at the opening of the store. And the car parking design to be submitted to be agreed, and we'd do that via condition 3 by adding to the bullets of what needs to be submitted for approval to cover off the issue around where electric vehicle charging points are, and some of those being for disabled and family users as well.
Sorry, I'm hoping everybody took careful note of that. So what I'm going to do now is ask if we can move to a vote, please. Although David Andrews wants to say something.
Well, only happy to propose, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Just going to make it clear that we'll be voting on the application in the papers with that short list of varied conditions that Richard has just outlined. David, Peter is asking me to ask you to be specific as to what you're proposing. I'm inferring you're proposing the application on the paper together with the varied conditions put forward by Richard, but can you just confirm or deny that, please?
I'm very happy to confirm that, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. So I've got to propose.
That is so very correct of Peter to ask.
I've got a proposer. Can I have a seconder? Ian, well done. And in which case, let's move to a vote. All those in favour, please show a hand. Thank you. And I think that means that's a full house, isn't it? Just for the record, there were anyone against? Any abstentions? No. So it's unanimous. Yeah. Okay. So just marshal my papers properly. This therefore is just to confirm that we have just voted to grant the following permission, which is application 3 211756 FUL, demolition of all existing buildings, erection of a Class E retail food store with associated car parking, reconfigured site access, servicing, landscaping, swale and installation of plant equipment at the site presently known as Gates of Stortford, 295 to 297 Stansted Road, Bishop Stortford. And that is together with the relatively short list of varied conditions that Officer Richard Freeman announced to the committee and was part of the proposal upon which we have voted. So thank you all very much indeed for that. And thank you to the local member and speakers for coming along. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. There's my 93 got it's over here, isn't it? I should also say thank you, Matt, very much for coming. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. Are we all ready to go? Yes. All right, so we're now moving on to the second planning item we need to consider this evening. This is application 322-1142 HH. And the proposal relates to the proposed conversion of garage to artist studio, removal of roof and construction of roof lantern structure, construction of side extension. And this is at premises, residential premises. The house is known as Sequoia, and that's in Elton Road, Hertford, Hertfordshire. And I think it's right to say, because it may bear on the discussion, that the reason this application is before this committee is because the partner of the applicant is a member, a councillor of this council. So the applicant himself is not a councillor here, but his partner is, and therefore, under the constitution, this application must come before the full committee. All that said, hopefully Edward Evans is just, is it Edward? It's just,
Correct.
yeah. Are you going to present this, or is Karen going to present it?
It's the case officer, so we've brought him along for the ride.
Okay, all right, okay. Okay, well, away you go, Karen. Let's see what happens.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just first draw members' attention to the addendum where officers have proposed the addition of an informative on the planning permission, should members be minded to agree the officer recommendation to approve the application. The purpose of the informative is to inform the landowner that this planning permission allows for the proposed building to be used for purposes ancillary to the main dwelling house. It doesn't allow for the building to be used for any other purpose that would constitute a material change of use, such as a self-contained residential dwelling or a commercial use that's independent from the main dwelling. So moving on to the presentation, this application proposes the conversion and extension of an existing detached garage into a domestic artist studio that will be used by the occupiers of the main dwelling house. You can see from the slide that the application site accommodates a detached dwelling house and also contains 2 garage outbuildings that are surrounded by hard standing and trees. The trees form part of the wider Redwoods Area Tree Preservation Order. The site is also located in the Hertford Conservation Area and is in relative close proximity to Port Hill House, which is a Grade 2 listed building. Move on to the next slide, please. We've just included this slide just to give you a feel for how verdant the site is. The front of the garage is shown in the bottom photo. You can't really see the rear of the existing garage because it's largely planted over, and then obviously you've got a photograph of the main dwelling. Next slide, please. I'm going to just very quickly describe the proposals. So here's a floor plan, which you can see largely comprises an open area with a small WC sink and some storage space. As mentioned at the start, this application is proposing to use the space for an artist studio that will be used by the occupants of the main dwelling house, although there's no reason why it couldn't also be used for other purposes ancillary to the main dwelling house, such as a home gym or home working space. It's not proposed that the primary use of this space would be used by other artists or for classes or to display and sell artwork. Therefore, it doesn't constitute a material change of use that requires planning permission, and therefore the principle of this proposal is considered to be acceptable. Next slide, please. The proposed building would retain the core structure of the garage, replacing the roof with a lantern style structure with various areas of glazing at different levels to bring light into the interior of the building. Whilst it does look like a 2-story building, it's actually single story. There's no first floor level in there. It's simply that size to allow lots of light to come into the space. The proposal also includes a small extension to the west of the west elevation, which only adds around 5 square meters of additional floor space. The design takes a modern approach and would incorporate render and a timber-clad finish with a sedum roof. Next slide, please. Just got another view of what the proposed building will look like.
A full assessment of the proposal against the relevant planning policies is set out in the committee report, but I'll just very quickly summarise the main issues that are under consideration. So in terms of design, although the building would be modern in style, wouldn't be visible from the public realm, the conservation area or the Grade 2 listed Port Hill House by virtue of the extensive landscaping and trees on site. The council's conservation and design officer has reviewed the proposals and is satisfied that the building would not give rise to unacceptable harm to these heritage assets. The building is considered to be well designed and of visual interest, and it's worth noting that the Bengio neighbourhood plan supports proposals that promote individuality in terms of external appearance. In terms of potential impacts on amenity, the proposal would be a substantial distance away from any neighbouring properties and provide limited at best opportunity for overlooking, being 15 metres from the nearest boundary. And it's also well screened by trees. No landscaping would be removed as part of this proposals, and the trees on site are protected by a wider TPO. A tree survey and arboricultural impact assessment was submitted with the application, which has been reviewed by the council's landscape officer, and they're satisfied that the proposals would have a minimal impact on the trees, particularly as the building would retain the existing structure at ground and below ground level. There is one tree that would require a crown lift to facilitate the increase in height, but this is considered to be acceptable. The proposal would see the loss of one garage space. However, you could probably tell from the site photographs and location plan that it retains an existing double garage and has ample hard standing for off-street parking within the site. In terms of climate change, the proposed building would have a sedum roof that would allow for a minor improvement to biodiversity, and it's clad in insulated render to improve its thermal efficiency. So overall, the proposal is considered to be compliant with relevant policies in East Herts District Plan, Bengio Neighbourhood Plan and the wider aims of the NPPF. And it's therefore recommended by officers that planning permission is granted subject to conditions and the informative I mentioned earlier. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Karen. Anybody got Councillor Andrews? I've just got a couple of local members, but not.
Chairman, as we all understand, that this is here partly as a result of a formality and our wish to be open and transparent in all this authority does. I've read the report very carefully. I do know the site. I can find no fault with it, no flaw. I'm perfectly content that it should go ahead.
Thank you, David. I don't mean this at all glibly, but I'm not least because Councillor Crystal is a local member. Just wondering if you want to say anything about, you know, bird boxes, swift boxes, bat boxes, just boxes, really.
Well, I'm delighted that there's a sedum roof. I think that's really positive. And I know there are bird and bat boxes in the vicinity, and so I'm sure this will contribute to the general positive biodiversity.
Very good. Thank you very much. Didn't mean to put you on the spot there. Okay, so Councillor Kemp.
Yes, I think I'd also comment that it seems an incredibly biodiverse site, and quite apart from bird and bat boxes, it was splendid to see the huge number of trees. In fact, it was really rather difficult to see the building being referred to.
Okay, all right. So we don't need to discuss something that doesn't need to be discussed, I don't think. So with the only extra is the informative, is that right, Karen? Okay, so allowing for the informative that Karen has presented to us, can I have a proposer? Thank you very much, Suzanne. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Crystal, I think. That's okay. So what we're proposing and has been seconded and we're about to vote on is application 322-1142HH. Conversion of garage to artist studio, removal of roof and construction of roof, land and structure, construction of site extension. This is at the property called Sequoia in Elton Road, Hertford, and that comes together with the informative that Karen has drawn to our attention. All those in favour, please show a hand. Good. I think that's a full house again. So just for good order's sake, any against? No. Any abstentions? No. Thank you very much indeed. So just to confirm, that means that we have granted application 322-1142HH, which is for conversion of garage to artist studio, removal of roofing, construction of roof lamps and structure, construction of side extension, together with an informative, which Karen has drawn to this committee's attention. Thank you. Let's now move on to item 6. Item 6 is just items for reporting and noting, so we don't need to vote, we just note. That leaves just item 7, which is urgent business. I'm unaware that there's any urgent business. No, very good. So at 9:05, I'm bringing the meeting to a close. Thank you all very much, everyone.